A very warm welcome to Dorothea von Hantelmann. We are very, very excited that Dorothea is here. This will be a conversation about exhibitions in the 21st century, new formats of exhibition. Dorothea has done an incredible book, How to Do Things with Art, which actually leads us right away to the topic. And it was incredibly fascinating to listen to Awama, to listen to Juliana, and to this whole idea that young people are the future. We very much connect also with what we did at the last DLD with 89 plus, with Simon Castells and Steffi about mapping a whole new generation of artists who are born with the digital age, artists who are born in 89 and younger. For the DLD, this time actually it was amazing because Steffi and I, completely independently of each other in an almost telepathic way, both said what is very, very urgent is to present Dorothea. We feel that it's very important that Dorothea's work as an art historian reaches a broader audience beyond the world of art history. So a very warm welcome again to Dorothea von Hantelmann. Dorothea. First, Dorothea will give an introduction, and then we'll have a chat.
Thank you very much. Thanks for everyone who remains, who's still here. It's a big honor. It's very exciting for me to be here. I honestly, truly enjoyed the talks and feel very inspired. And we'll try to connect, which is a little bit difficult because my topic is, obviously a very different one. Yes, I'm an art historian. I work on the history and social function of exhibitions. Let me try to, like in 5 minutes, give you an idea why exhibitions are interesting to think about. Well, maybe we can have the first image, please. The entry is maybe a very simple diagnosis or observations. Museums and exhibitions have become extremely successful in the past decades or so. We have more museums built than ever before in the past 20 years. We have biennials spreading out worldwide with increasing visitor numbers. A few years ago, the Chinese government announced the plan to build 1,000 museums in the next decade, which is unprecedented that a state somehow implements a whole format, cultural format, onto a country which has, as you all know, a huge theater tradition but no museum tradition. So my initial question was why? Like, why have exhibitions and museums become such an important, significant cultural factor, as opposed to, for instance, theater, and which we know has a much longer tradition also in Western countries. And my thesis that I start working from is that this significance has something to do with the format as such. You heard I'm an art historian, but I'm less in that sense, less interested in individual artworks or aesthetics or artists, but in thinking about the format of the exhibition as such. So what is this format? The format exists basically of 4 parameters or values. First of all, the individual. As opposed to theater, which is a collective affair, as you know, it's a group thing to go to see a theater piece. The idea of the art experience is a one-on-one experience. Historically, that was tremendously important to invent a ritual, something like a ritual that is dedicated to the individual. It was a huge discussion around 1800 when the first museums were built, if one could actually allow individual people to go individually through museums. But there was the idea that this could have some benefit because the category of the individual wasn't really there, but was about to be invented and to be born in the early 19th century. And as we all know, it's like the core of sort of modern democratic societies. So the individual, but the individual in relation to a material thing, an object. Museums are basically object temples, places where objects are valued, are quasi-worshipped. And of course, it's no coincidence that a productivist society, so a society that defines itself in terms of what it can produce, creates temples that are dedicated to produced objects and objects that have a relation to the market. Structurally, an artwork is a product. We think of it as a higher idea of the product, but structurally it's a product. It's bought and sold. And then all these elements are immersed into a narrative. Think of the canonical idea of the museum, a narrative of progress. We start somewhere in the past, we arrive in the present, and we have an idea where the future goes to. So it's an idea of linear time, also something that in the 19th century was very important to develop for Western societies that are built on ideologies of progress, of development. So an institution that could actually build linear time, give it a spatial form, make it something that could be experienced in an itinerary, you know, where you like give it a spatial form, where you start somewhere and end somewhere, retrace progress with the visitor's route, so to say. So we have progress, the market, the individual, and the object. And these are 4 pillars of modern Western democratic societies. And museums become the place that assembles these categories in a certain relation and cultivates them and gives them value and ennobles them, so to speak. So this is why I think every society is in need of a ritual. Yeah? Historical society. I mean, you see these 3 images. It's the church. What is the difference between the church and the museum? The museum is, by the way, the picture on the right, whereas in the middle you see a warehouse, both around 1910. But the picture on the left is a church. What's the difference between the church and the museum? The image, the painting in the church is part of a fixed cosmology. Yeah, it's part of an altar, it's part of a belief system which is fixed, which is enclosed. The moment where this painting leaves the church and goes into the museum, it goes from a fixed cosmology into an open cosmology. The structure in a museum can be changed, it's open. We go from a space that is also a ritual space, but a ritual for a collective, with fixed beginning and end, to a space that is individualized and that is liberal. You can come and go when you want. You can spend as much attention to an artwork as you like. So museums are modern rituals in that sense that they correspond to a modern sensitivity, which is individualized, which is liberal, which believes in pluralism. You wouldn't think of any big state-funded museum that is dedicated to only one artist. This doesn't exist. It's important that there's a collection. The collection stands for a diversity of subjectivities, artists, pluralism. One image adds, relativizes the other. So, and then there's the warehouse. What is the difference between warehouses, which are also centered on material objects, and museums? Well, museums have a different form of legitimacy, of authority, because they are not only subjected to the market, but they are sort of, they are given a certain authority by the state, the public museum. Museums are places where values are produced. And this is maybe, I mean, if I may say, this could be a point where my presentation could be connected to the previous ones. I'm interested in museums and exhibitions because I'm interested in value production, yeah, in the production of values. And in modern Western societies, museums are, I mean, think what will happen if an ethnographer digs out Europe in 3,000 years. Yeah, he or she will find in every major or minor city these temples of objects right in the middle, very representative buildings and so on. These are not only object temples. They are places where societies show their value, what is important to them. And to Western societies, the idea of the material object is extremely important. Okay, so this is why I think these are interesting spaces to observe, because looking at exhibition shows us, I mean, to observe how exhibition formats have changed tells us something about how these societies have changed, how their, let's say, socioeconomic premises have changed, yeah? How their values have changed. From the early 19th century, where it was about to establish something like a market society and a sort of more open cosmology and belief system, the notion of the individual and so on, to the 20th century, which slowly shifts from market society to consumer society, and the white cube becomes the place that corresponds to these changes with a highly flexibilized object that has no context anymore. Think of the white space, the white cube with one image and one viewer. This is the ideal sort of consumer with his or her object, a highly flexibilized, individualized space with an object that is bereft of any fixed context that can, this is like the total opposite of the church. The church is like the painting that has fixed in a certain structure. The white cube is a painting that has no context anymore, that can enter in ever new context, like the individual of the late 20th century, which is essentially an individual that can enter in ever new and ever changing relations, yeah, that has no fixed sort of relation, stable relation anymore, like a family or like an earlier, pre-modern, like a feudal society or so on. So highly individualized. And up to sort of, and this is what I would like to speak about with Hans Ulrich, because this is an interest we share, up to contemporary sort of reconfigurations of this. And at that point, maybe we can show the second image. This is a quote that I actually have from Hans Ulrich, because it's from an interview he did with Richard Hamilton. We'll only remember exhibitions that invented a new display feature. According to my line of thinking, as an artist, if an artist is interesting in some kind of social impact or significance or statement, he or she would have to take this exhibition format into an account. I mean, any painting that is included into this given structure is like an actor who plays in the script that somebody else has written. So the question is how to alter this format, how to alter this, precisely because it has become so important and because it's globally exported. So to work on what is actually exported there, what are the values inscribed into this? Is it still a notion of progress, of development, the belief into the material object as the protagonist of meaning production and so on? Or what is it that is actually transported there to communicate it also to other sort of cultural and geographic contexts? And this is why we are both interested in artists who work with this format. And I show you in these images 3 examples, but maybe I would like to hand it over to Hans Ulrich now and ask him, because he as a curator is what characterizes his work among many things is that for him each exhibition is a moment to reconfigure what he's, as he calls it, the rules of the game, to re-articulate, to reform, to reconfigure the format of the exhibition. So maybe you could say something about this from your perspective.
Yeah, maybe we can talk about the show, on the right first. I mean, it's kind of fascinating that a lot of discussions, which happened today, had to do also with this, question of intersubjectivity. A lot of discussions had to do with this idea, obviously, of the digital age. What does it mean then for us to have an exhibition, in the digital age? And to tell a story, it was on January the 1st, 2000. I sort of rang Matthew Barney to wish him a happy new millennium. And Matthew Barney said, he has a very strong desire for live experience. And that is something which we have observed ever since. We have it in the work of Matthew Barney, we have it in the work of Henri Sala on the right, of Philippe Pareno in the middle, of Pierre Huyghe on the left. We have it, of course, also in the work of Tino Segal and his situations, which we cannot show here because he doesn't want his work, to be photographed, but we can talk about it. So what is important is that these are all situations which somehow have to do with intersubjective live situations. Maybe a few words about the show of Henri Sala on the right. He has modified the architecture of the Serpentine. He's developed a score, a musical score, an exhibition score, and that creates new worlds. The air and also the sound are oscillating between the inside and the outside. there is a time code where the saxophonist plays his music live. So all of a sudden, out of a film, a live saxophonist comes out. But this is not a performance, because the performance isn't there just from 6 to 7 or from 3 to 4. The saxophonist plays all day long from 10 to 6. So we can say the saxophonist is a kind of a, living sculpture. And the exhibition as a whole is used as a medium, or we could also say as a kind of a Gesamtkunstwerk, where all the elements, come together. And that's true for the show in the middle of Philippe Areno, and that's true for the show where Philippe actually makes it snow outside, where he guides a group of visitors, a crowd through the museum, through the different situations. And it's definitely true also for the work of Pierre Wieg on the left, which is something Dorothea has been writing about a lot. And Philippe Areno, who is in the middle, whose exhibition at the Serpentine you see, has been talking a lot about this exhibition actually as being a time code. We've developed with him an opera, again a live situation, an opera called Tempo di Postino, Postman Time, where artists were given time and not space, and where basically the exhibition happened in an opera house. But Dorothea, it would be interesting to hear from you more about this research, maybe also or your current text on Pierre Wieg, because that shows us ways beyond the exhibition.
Yeah, I mean, maybe some of you have seen this work here on the left, because it was part of the last Documenta, the Documenta exhibition last year in Kassel. It's actually, it took place in the park, in a huge Baroque park, but actually in an area of the park that probably none of you had seen before, because it's the composting area. And he slightly transformed this composting area by planting certain plants, by inserting a sculpture, which you see there with a live bee, with a bee, Bienenschwarm, bees on the head. And he created it into some kind of environment, which was literally alive, growing. This bee head was becoming enormous within weeks or months. It looked like a tumor, like a monster almost. There were ants and a dog with a pink leg. So the interesting thing is you came in, you didn't know actually where the work began, where it ends, because you didn't really know which plants were planted by him, which were there anyways before already. What was arranged, what was not arranged. There were piles of stone, a fallen tree, and parts of former Documenta artworks that were not really signified as such. So I'm showing you this because it's like, I mean, think of the white cube. The white cube is a place that is separated from natural processes. Everything in there is regulated. Light, acoustics, humidity, temperature, everything. So the whole idea about the white cube is to make a distinction. Nature, culture, me, the object. It's very much a modern way of thinking in categories and in distinction. I make a critical judgment about this work. And so on, yeah? So this stands for deeply modern thinking, of course, a paradigm of modernity, which is directed to rupture, to break up rigid structures of pre-modern time, yeah? Into sort of different categories. What we see here, a work like, for instance, this, is something entirely new. It stands for a very different paradigm. It stands for a way of thinking in connectivities, in networks, and part of these networks are human but also non-human agents, to speak with Bruno Latour, who's big influence for my thinking here. Art is a part of this network as well. You see the sculpture, so is industrial production. But the hierarchy is not there anymore. Yeah? It's the bees and the sculpture, and the bees transport the seeds of plants, so there is a sort of dynamic process going on that is independent from me as a viewer, but also from the artist. So it's the network, it's a thinking in networks and association that is stands for the opposite paradigm of what the white cube stands for. And this is why I was highly interested in this work. It proposes something completely, it's like an exhibition. You go from one thing in there to the other, but there is no counterpart or object anymore that is sort of the protagonist of meaning production. So it shows a completely different idea of what art or aesthetic experience, if you want to say so, could be, and what it would mean to think in terms of immanence and in integrative and not oppositionalist, yeah, like in a modernist way. And this maybe my last word about this is, you know, this as I said, this modernist paradigm is very much about breaking, about rupturing, and I think today is much more about sort of, and I'm thinking again with Bruno Latour's and his compositionist manifesto about building up compositions, yeah, trying to carefully reassemble what has been broken apart by modernity, and to try out new compositions in a way. Yeah? And a composition can fail and can succeed. A composition can be recomposed and newly composed, but it's an attempt to bring things back together, which in a certain way corresponds more to a so-called female or feminine sort of spirit than a very sort of stereotypical male-driven activity of sort of rupturing and breaking up of modernity. So this is maybe a way to link.
Yeah, it could be almost a great conclusion. And obviously one thing, I've got a last question for you. One thing which is also, I think, urgent to mention is that Alain Robbe-Grillet, the late novelist and father of the Nouveau Roman, he always said that in the 60s, the Nouvelle Vague in cinema and the novel were kind of like most advanced yet acceptable formats. It was a possibility to do a highly experimental novel, yet reach out very, very broadly. Or it was possible in cinema to make an extreme experiment, early Godard, and reach out to many, many people. And I think what is important and what Dorothea shows in a lot of her work, and what we try to do by actually curating these exhibitions, is to create such a Maya moment, today through exhibitions. And it is important, I think, to say that experiments like Philippe Pareno or Henri Sala at the Serpentine, we have 1 million visitors a year. So in a very, very small space, in London, in Kensington Gardens. So that's a lot of people. Or bigger museums, as Dorothea pointed out today, have several million visitors. And in some kind of way, this idea of the exhibition being this sort of medium today, which can be both very, very experimental and yet also reach many people, is maybe another kind of important point. Now, Dorothea, it has just been announced in the German press that you, and that leads us actually from the exhibition to the professorship of exhibition, that you have been appointed the Documenta professor. And that is very fascinating. In the city of Kassel, where I was already professor of promenadology, Lucius Burkhardt, the wonderful urbanist, was appointed in Kassel some decades ago, or actually the professor of strolling, of going on a walk. So Kassel is specialized in unorthodox professorships. And it's fascinating that you, as the great expert of exhibition, are now the Documenta professor. It's a professorship of a specific exhibition. Can you maybe tell us a few words about this fascinating appointment?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't started yet, but it's actually a new thing. It stands in between the art school yes, I'm hired by the art school. I'm teaching the history and the significance of the Documenta, which is basically the history of contemporary art and art exhibitions. But it's very closely linked also to the Documenta archive, which is a fantastic archive. And I have the huge privilege to work with the material of this archive together with the students. And of course, it's also linked to the Documenta, to the Documenta GmbH. And I mean, in a way, it's a very integrative position that is installed, instantiated to combine all these different institutions. And yeah, I think what I'm interested in personally to do with this job is that Documenta, of course, I mean, everyone knows that it's a fantastic exhibition. It has this particular rhythm of taking place every 5 months, as opposed to biennials, which usually happen every 2 years, every 5 years. I'm sorry. because in 2 years it's very hard to actually do something, but 5 years is enough time to be able to define sort of not only the state of the arts, which is what Documenta is supposed to do, but also in a certain way the state of thinking. Every 5 years is a good rhythm to have this ambition to really define something. And this makes it that every Documenta is a document of its time. And this makes it for me so interesting to study. But what I would like to do is to give it a broader context. I mean, there have been several publications, many publications, great publications, but always written by people who are very close to the institution Documenta, who know incredibly much about its history. But what it needs now is, I think, a broader context to the history of exhibitions, to other discourses, other things going on, other thoughts of styles of thinking, like the one I exemplified with the Pierre Wieck work, for instance. So this is what I would like to do and what I'm looking forward to do there.
And obviously, this idea which you always point out about that actually exhibitions are new formats, that every time has its exhibitions. I mean, it used to be that every time, every moment has its art, and now that artists use exhibition as their medium, we can modify this phrase and say to every time it's exhibitions, and that obviously leads us back to DLD, leads us back also to the previous conversation we had a few months ago at the DLD in January with the artists of 89 plus, because it will be very fascinating to see and further explore how these artists born in 89 and younger, who have actually grown up with the internet, how they will invent somehow new formats, which will be the formats of their generation. Last but not least, I just want to emphasize again, How to Do Things with Art is a very urgent book. It's a really very much a manual into the art of our time. So it's urgent to read Dorothea's book. I'd like
and sorry for the preface.
I'd like to thank again, of course, Steffi and Maria for this amazing experience here at DLD. As always, it's such an amazing way of going beyond the fear of pooling knowledge, of learning, and it is so wonderful that for now so many years, this process can continue, and every year we learn more. So many thanks to Dorothea, many thanks to Steffi, to Maria, many thanks to all of you. Thank you.